Montana was waiting with dreams of a small business and a quiet life after 12 years as a ranger. But Baghdad had other plans for me on March 15, 2004. I'm Tom Briggins, and I carry memories that blend with sand and blood, a mosaic of experiences that no therapist has managed to erase. I commanded a squad of 8 men, all of them exceptional young men who trusted me to bring them home. Rodriguez, our sniper, had just become a father. Martinez was the youngest, always with a smile on his face, even in the worst situations. Wilson, my second in command, was just 2 weeks away from completing his tour duty. Our mission seemed relatively simple: escort a group of local civilians, including doctors and teachers, through the center of Baghdad to a safe zone. Intelligence indicated moderate insurgent activity in the area, nothing we couldn't handle. We started moving in formation at 0600, taking advantage of the early morning light. The first sign that something was wrong came when I noticed an abnormal silence in the streets. Baghdad was a city that, even at war, maintained its own energy, a constant pulse of life. But that morning, the streets were deserted, the windows closed, as if the city itself was holding its breath. "Something's not right," Wilson muttered over the radio, echoing my own thoughts. I signaled for the group to stay more compact, the civilians in the center of our formation. That's when the first shot cut through the air. The sound of the shot reverberated between the buildings, followed immediately by the sound of shattering glass. In a matter of seconds, we were under heavy fire from multiple directions. The insurgents had planned well, and we were in a perfectly executed ambush. "Contact at 3 o'clock. Contact at 9 o'clock, shouted Rodriguez as we scrambled for cover. The civilians, terrified, crouched behind a low wall while we set up a defensive perimeter. It was at that moment that I felt the impact. A bullet found a gap in my vest, passing through my left shoulder. The pain was instantaneous, but training spoke louder. There was no time for pain, not when lives depended on my decisions. "Wilson, keep suppression on the right flank. Martinez, I need you and Miller to protect the civilians. Rodriguez, take out that sniper on the 3rd floor." The orders came out automatically, years of training translating into precise actions. The next few minutes were a hell of a crossfire. The air was thick with gunpowder smoke and dust, making visibility difficult. Chunks of concrete flew with each bullet impact, and the deafening sound of gunfire was interrupted only by shouts of command and requests for ammunition. I saw Wilson fall first, hit in the leg as he changed position. Martinez ran to his aid, exposing himself to enemy fire. "No!" I shouted, but it was too late. Martinez was hit in the back, falling next to Wilson. Blood ran down my arm, staining my uniform, but the adrenaline kept the pain at bay. We needed to get out of that death zone. I quickly scanned the terrain, identifying an escape route through a side alley. "Rodriguez, cover. Miller, help Wilson. Johnson, guide the civilians. Let's move in groups of 3. I ordered, my voice hoarse from shouting orders and coordinates over the radio. The sound of gunfire continued unabated, but we began our organized retreat. Every meter gained cost sweat and blood. I lost count of how many times I had to stop to return fire, protecting the others' retreat. The image of the frightened eyes of the civilians, especially the children among them, haunts me to this day. There was an elderly doctor who refused to leave behind a little girl who had been grazed. I carried her myself, ignoring the stabbing pain in my shoulder. It was the longest 45 minutes of my life. When we finally reached the safe zone, our unit was reduced and bloodied, but alive. We lost Martinez that day, and Wilson never walked without a cane again. Of the 8 civilians we were escorting, we managed to save 6. We received medals for that action, of course. They called heroism what, for us, was simply doing our job, trying to keep each other alive. But no medal can bring back those we've lost. No award can erase the scars, both visible and invisible. Sometimes on the quietest nights, I can still hear the echo of those shots, feel the weight of that little girl in my arms, see Martinez's face in his last moment. These are memories that I carry with me, not as a burden, but as a testament that, even in humanity's darkest moments, there is still room for courage and sacrifice. The heat of that day in Baghdad seemed different. Even after so many years serving in Iraq, I never got used to that stifling sensation. As we tried to reorganize ourselves after the first confrontation, I realized that our situation was even more complex than I had first imagined. "Sir, we've lost contact with HQ," whispered Johnson, our radio operator, sweat dripping down his young face. The expression in his eyes revealed the same controlled fear I saw in all my men. We were alone, with no air support, no reinforcements. The civilians we were escorting, 3 doctors, 2 teachers, and a family with children, were huddled together, trying to remain calm despite the chaos. Dr. Hassan, a respected surgeon in Baghdad, was helping Wilson with his leg wound, using limited supplies from the medical kit. "We need to move," I decided, assessing the mental map of the area. "The insurgents know our position. Standing still makes us easy targets." My shoulder throbbed, but there was no time for pain. The blood had coagulated, forming a dark stain on my uniform. Rodriguez set up position at a second-floor window, providing cover while we planned our next move. "I see movement 3 blocks away, heading northeast," he reported over the radio. "They seem to be regrouping." That's when we heard the first mortar. The distinctive sound of the projectile cutting through the air made my stomach churn. "Everyone into the basement? Now!" I shouted, helping to evacuate the civilians. The impact shook the entire building, raising a cloud of dust and debris. In the darkness of the basement, among old boxes and rubble, I managed to gather my team for a brief council. Miller, our explosives expert, had a plan. "We can use the utility tunnels," he suggested, pointing to a city plan he was carrying. "They connect several blocks. It's not ideal, but it's our best option," I added. The tunnels were dangerous confined spaces, perfect ambush points, but staying there meant certain death. We organized our descent into groups. Rodriguez and Johnson in front, followed by the civilians, with Miller and I covering the rear. Wilson, still limping, needed constant support. The smell of mold and damp in the tunnels was suffocating, mixed with the metallic odor of blood emanating from our wounds. "Keep close formation," I instructed in a low voice. "No more lights than necessary." Our footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, each sound amplified by the darkness. Little Fatima, Professor al-Rashid's daughter, held her father's hand tightly, her big eyes shining with restrained tears. We moved slowly through the tunnels, stopping at each intersection to check our position. Miller's map was our only reference in the underground labyrinth. Every minute, the weight of responsibility for those lies weighed more heavily on my shoulders. After what seemed like an eternity, we heard distant, muffled, but unmistakable sounds of combat above. "We're approaching the green zone," whispered Miller, consulting the map. 2 more blocks. That's when our rear lights picked up movement. "Contact!" shouted Johnson, his voice reverberating off the walls. The sound of gunfire filled the tunnel, deafening in the confined space. I pushed the civilians behind a concrete column, while Rodriguez set up a firing position. "Miller, take the civilians. Follow the plan," I ordered, engaging the attackers with suppressive fire. The flash of gunfire briefly illuminated the tunnel, revealing shadows moving in the darkness. Wilson, despite being wounded, managed to eliminate 2 insurgents who were trying to flank us. The combat in the confined space was brutal, claustrophobic. Every shot seemed 1,000 times louder. Every movement was limited by the narrow walls. But we managed to hold our position, giving Miller time to evacuate the civilians. "Last Mac," warned Rodriguez, changing his magazine. We could hear more insurgents approaching. "Sir, we need to move." "Smoke grenades on 3, I commanded. 1, 2, 3. The tunnel quickly filled with a dense curtain of smoke, giving us cover to retreat. We ran blindly, guided only by the memory of the path and the hope that Miller had managed to lead the civilians to safety. The sound of our panting and hurried footsteps echoed off the walls, mingling with the distant shouts of our pursuers. Every step was a battle against exhaustion and pain, but training and adrenaline kept us going. When we finally emerged from the tunnels, daylight had never seemed so bright. Miller had succeeded, and the civilians were safe, already under the protection of a green zone unit. But our ordeal wasn't over yet. The sound of gunfire and explosions still echoed through the city, reminding us that in Baghdad, no moment of peace was guaranteed. Night fell over Baghdad like a heavy cloak, but the fighting was far from over. Even after we managed to reach the green zone with the civilians, our mission had a price that was still being exacted. Dr. Hassan had done his best to stabilize Wilson, but the medical infrastructure was overloaded with casualties from other clashes. "Sir, we have hostile movement approaching the southern perimeter," reported Rodriguez, who, despite being exhausted, maintained his observation position. My injured shoulder protested with every movement, but the adrenaline was still coursing through my veins, keeping me focused. As I coordinated our next action with the local command, I couldn't get the image of Martinez lying in the street out of my mind. Every leader carries the weight of the lives lost under their command, and that would be a burden I would carry forever. Johnson tried to establish communication with other nearby units, while Miller organized our remaining ammunition. Briggins called out Dr. Hassan, his calm voice contrasting with the chaos around him. "I need to examine your wound." Reluctantly, I allowed him to change my makeshift bandage. His eyes revealed a deep understanding of the horror we had all faced. "You save a lot of lives today," he said as he worked. "But I didn't save them all," I thought to myself. Martinez's young face continued to haunt me, along with the 2 civilians we lost during the initial ambush. War has a cruel way of reminding us that, no matter how much we prepare, some losses are inevitable. The sounds of mortars and artillery fire continued to echo through the city, more distant now, but still threatening. Our position in the green zone offered protection, but we knew that the insurgents would not give up easily. They had shown impressive coordination in their initial attack, suggesting that they had inside information about our route. "Captain," Wilson called out, limping to my position with the help of his makeshift cane. "We've intercepted some communications. They're regrouping for another attack, possibly targeting the field hospital." My blood ran cold. The hospital was full of wounded, including civilians we had rescued. I gathered my reduced team for a quick briefing. Even exhausted and wounded, I saw in their eyes the same determination that had kept us alive during the ambush. "We can't let them attack the hospital," I declared, spreading out a map on a makeshift table. "Rodriguez, I need you to—" A nearby explosion interrupted my orders, shaking the building we were in. Dust fell from the ceiling as we instinctively ducked. "Contact! Sector 4, someone shouted over the radio. The insurgents had begun their attack earlier than we had expected. "Johnson, coordinate with artillery. Miller, organize a defensive line in the western corridor. Rodriguez, find an elevated position and give me cover." The orders flowed automatically, years of training and experience manifesting themselves at critical moments. Dr. Hassan and his medical team were working frantically to evacuate the most critical patients to safer areas of the complex. I saw fear in the eyes of the civilians, but also a quiet resolve. They trusted us to keep them safe, and we couldn't fail them again. The next few minutes became a blur of action and reaction. I coordinated with other units present in the green zone, setting up defensive perimeters and evacuation routes. My injured shoulder protested with every movement, but the pain was secondary to the need to protect those lives in our charge. "Sniper, 3rd floor, red building," warned Rodriguez over the radio. Before I could reply, I saw a flash of movement and heard the precise firing of his rifle. "Target neutralized," he reported calmly. The battle intensified around us, but we held our position. Each man knew his role. Each move was calculated and precise. Even Wilson, limited by his injury, coordinated communications and logistical support with impressive efficiency. It was during this controlled chaos that I realized something fundamental about leadership in combat. It wasn't just about giving orders or making tactical decisions. It was about keeping hope alive, about showing your men that, even in the most desperate situations, there is a way forward. The hours dragged by as we repelled successive waves of attacks. Sweat dripped down our faces, mixing with dust and blood. Ammunition was starting to run low, but our determination remained unwavering. Every life saved was a small victory against the chaos that surrounded us. When the sun finally began to rise over Baghdad, silence gradually replaced the sound of fighting. The insurgents had withdrawn, leaving behind only destruction and unanswered questions. I looked at my men, exhausted but alive, and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. That night had changed us forever. Some say that war reveals a man's true character. I say that it forges him, for better or worse, in the flames of conflict and sacrifice. And that night in Baghdad, each of us was forged anew, marked by the experience in a way that words could never fully describe. The morning light in Baghdad always seemed different to me after that mission. As we watched the first rays of sunlight touch the rubble around us, the reality of our losses began to weigh even more heavily. The silence that followed the night's battle was almost deafening, interrupted only by the occasional clatter of debris being cleared and distant orders being relayed. "Sir, we found Martinez's papers," said Johnson, handing me a blood-stained folder. Inside were letters to his family, photos of his newborn son, and a locket his wife had given him. The pain in my injured shoulder seemed insignificant compared to the weight of those belongings in my hands. Rodriguez maintained his vigilance, but I could see in his eyes the tiredness of someone who had spent the whole night on high alert. Wilson, leaning on his makeshift cane, was coordinating the evacuation of the last wounded from the hospital with the local command. Miller was taking stock of our remaining ammunition, and we were dangerously low on supplies. Dr. Hassan approached me again, his expression grave. "Captain Briggins, we need to talk about the patterns of the attack," he said quietly. "Those insurgents, they knew too much about our route, about our procedures." His words confirmed my own suspicions that there was an information leak somewhere in the chain of command. I gathered my remaining team in a makeshift operations room. Maps covered the walls, marked with the ambush points and escape routes we had used. "We need to understand how they knew," I said, ignoring the pain radiating from my shoulder. "Someone provided accurate intelligence about our mission." Johnson presented the communications intercepted during the night. "Their movement patterns were very specific, sir. They even knew our alternative radio frequencies." The young radio operator had matured years in just one day of combat. While we were analyzing the evidence, a new transmission came in. Yet another column of civilians needed to be evacuated from a nearby district. I looked at my men, exhausted and wounded, knowing that we couldn't refuse the mission. Word doesn't wait for us to recover from our losses. "Rodriguez, only to set up cover positions here and here," I indicated on the map. "Miller, prepare controlled demolition charges at these points if we're ambushed again. I want to have escape route options." "Wilson, you'll coordinate from base due to your injury." Dr. Hassan insisted on accompanying the new mission. "You'll need medical support," he argued, "and I know that district and can help identify safe points." His presence would be invaluable, especially considering that I was still carrying the wound on my shoulder. Before we left, I paid one last visit to the spot where we had lost Martinez. A small American flag had been placed there by someone from the unit. I made a silent promise that his death would not be in vain. We would find the one who had compromised our mission. The city looked different now, as if every shadow hid a potential threat. Our formation was tighter, more cautious. The experience of the previous night had taught us valuable lessons about trust and vigilance. The distant sound of explosions reminded us that the war continued, regardless of our personal losses. "Movement 2 blocks ahead," Rodriguez whispered over the radio. I raised my fist, signaling the team to stop. Through my scope, I saw a group of civilians moving nervously between the buildings. They were our targets, but something seemed wrong. "There's something different about the way they move," Miller observed, echoing my concern. "Years of experience have taught us to trust these instincts." I ordered the team to hold position while Rodriguez and I moved in for a closer look. It was then that we noticed some of the civilians were carrying weapons hidden under their clothes. It was a repeat of the previous ambush, but this time we were prepared. Silently, I signaled our tactical retreat. We wouldn't fall into the same trap twice. "Johnson, transmit our coordinates to artillery," I ordered. "Let's turn the tables on them." The plan was simple. We would make it look like we had fallen into the trap. only to lead them straight into a prepared firing zone. The combat that followed was brief, but intense. Our experience and preparation made the difference. When the dust settled, we had captured 3 of the insurgents, including one who seemed to have detailed knowledge of our operations. Who provided the information? I asked the prisoner in Arabic. His initial silence was broken when I mentioned specific names of local liaison officers. A flash of recognition in his eyes confirmed my suspicions that betrayal was coming from within. That day in Baghdad taught us that in war, the real battle is not always against the enemy we can see. Sometimes the most dangerous ghosts are those who hide among us, wearing friendly uniforms and smiling as they plot our destruction. The discovery of betrayal within our own ranks changed everything. As we processed the captured prisoners, I began to put together the pieces of a much bigger puzzle than we had initially imagined. The information obtained in the interrogation pointed to a network of informants infiltrated at various levels of the command, explaining how the insurgents were able to predict our movements with such precision. "Captain, you need to see this," Johnson called out, handing me a series of documents found with one of the prisoners. They were detailed operation orders, some dating back to weeks before our initial ambush. My blood boiled as I recognized some of the names of people we considered allies. Rodriguez maintained a surveillance of the perimeter while Wilson, Miller, and I analyzed the evidence. Dr. Hassan was translating some documents into Arabic, his expression becoming increasingly grave. "They weren't just after us," he explained. "The ambush was part of a larger plan to destabilize the entire region. Martinez died because of traitors," Wilson muttered, his voice laced with bitterness. The weight of that revelation hung over all of us. We were not only fighting an external enemy, but also the treachery that lurked in our own ranks. I decided to take decisive action. With the evidence in hand, I established safe contact with a military intelligence officer I still trusted. "We need a cleanup operation," I explained, "but it has to be discreet. If the infiltrators realize we've found out," the rest of that day was spent planning our next move. Each member of the team had a crucial role. Miller prepared a series of fake operations to identify more leaks. Johnson monitored all communications, looking for suspicious patterns. Rodriguez, with his lethal precision, ensured our safety while we worked. "Sir, we've identified 3 more possible collaborators," Johnson reported, after hours of analyzing communications, "all in key positions to compromise our operations." The list included a logistics officer, a translator, and, most disturbingly, a platoon commander. The plan we developed was risky, but necessary. We would feed false information through specific channels, tracing its movement to the final recipients. Each member of the team would be responsible for a part of the operation, ensuring that no one, apart from our immediate circle, knew the full plan. "It's like fishing with dynamite," commented Miller, as we finalized the preparations. "We're going to make so much noise that they'll have no choice but to react." The execution began at dusk. We disseminated information about a large escort operation that would take place the following morning. The details were specific enough to seem credible, but each version of the information contained small variations that would allow us to track their movements. "Movement in Sector 7, Rodriguez warned over the radio. 3 individuals meeting in an abandoned cafe." It was exactly the kind of reaction we were expecting. Johnson recorded all communications, while Miller and I positioned ourselves to observe the encounter. What we witnessed over the next few hours confirmed our worst suspicions. The network of informants was larger and more organized than we had imagined. We observed information being exchanged, money changing hands, plans being made to compromise future operations. "We have everything on tape," confirmed Johnson. "Audio, video, and precise coordinates of all the meetings." It was enough evidence not only to expose the traitors, but also to dismantle the entire network of informants. The operation continued into the night. Each new discovery increased the seriousness of the situation. It wasn't just about leaking information, it was a coordinated attempt to undermine the entire military presence in the region. The faces of the traitors, some of them people we had known for years, would forever be etched in our memories. "We need to act now," decided Wilson, who who even though wounded was still a voice of reason in our team. Every minute we wait is another minute they have to do more damage. With authorization from higher command, we began the final phase of the operation. In coordination with other reliable units, we began to arrest the identified suspects. Each arrest was precise, silent, and most importantly, simultaneous, giving them no chance to alert each other. It was during one of these arrests that we found something even more disturbing: documents detailing future insurgent operations, including plans for large-scale attacks against civilian targets. The discovery gave our mission a new sense of urgency. We weren't just avenging our fallen, we were preventing future tragedies. Dawn brought with it not only a new day in Baghdad, but the weight of the revelations we had uncovered. The network of informants we had identified was just the tip of a much larger and darker iceberg. As I organized the seized documents on my makeshift desk, my injured shoulder constantly reminded me of the price we had paid for this information. "Captain, the higher command is requesting our presence," informed Johnson, his serious expression reflecting the gravity of the situation. The last 48 hours had aged all of us, turning young soldiers into veterans hardened by the reality of betrayal. Rodriguez, who maintained his relentless vigilance, approached with new information. "We've intercepted more communications, sir. It looks like they're planning a large-scale retaliation." His voice, normally firm, betrayed a concern we shared. Dr. Hassan, who had become an integral part of our unit, was studying a map of the city marked with possible insurgent targets. "They'll try to hit civilian targets," he said, pointing to various locations. "Hospitals, schools, markets. They want to create as much chaos as possible." Wilson, still limping but determined, was coordinating with other units to prepare for what was to come. "We have to act fast," he insisted. "Every minute lost is a chance for them to reorganize." I assembled my team for what would be our last mission together. The plan was audacious, but necessary. We would use the information obtained to anticipate and prevent the planned attacks, while capturing the main leaders of the informant network. "Miller, I need you to set up controlled charges here and here," I indicated on the map. "We'll force them to use specific routes." The explosives expert nodded, already mentally calculating his material needs. The operation began at dusk. Our unit, supported by loyal Iraqi special forces, moved silently through the streets of Baghdad. Dr. Hassan's knowledge of the city proved invaluable once again, guiding us along safe routes to our positions. "Visual contact with the first target," whispered Rodriguez over the radio. Through his scope, we could see a group of men carrying boxes into a warehouse. Johnson confirmed that they were explosives intended for civilian targets. The first attack was quick and precise. Miller detonated strategically placed charges, blocking escape routes while our team and support forces converged on the site. Resistance was minimal, and the element of surprise was in our favor. But the real battle was just beginning. Information obtained from the first prisoners revealed even more sinister plans. "They have sleeper cells all over the city," reported Wilson, analyzing the seized documents, "ready to be activated at the first sign." The next few hours were a test of our endurance and determination. Moving from target to target, we systematically dismantled the insurgent network. Each successful operation provided us with more information, allowing us to anticipate their movements. It was during one of these operations that we found something that changed everything. In a small office, we discovered evidence linking high-ranking foreign officials to the network of informants. The betrayal went far beyond Baghdad, extending to levels we hadn't even imagined. "That explains a lot," murmured Dr. Hassan, examining the documents. "The attack patterns, the detailed knowledge of our operations." His voice faltered as he realized the extent of the conspiracy. The night progressed, and with it our operation reached its climax. Rodriguez identified a high-level meeting taking place in a fortified compound. It was our chance to decapitate the snake once and for all. "Last mission, everyone," I announced, gathering the team. Every face reflected the same determination I felt. For Martinez, for everyone we had lost, we needed to finish what we had started. The assault on the compound was the most intense operation I've ever commanded. Miller coordinated a series of synchronized explosions that created the perfect distraction. Johnson kept enemy communications under control, while Rodriguez provided lethal cover from his elevated position. Amid the controlled chaos of the operation, I confronted one of the main architects of the treason network. His final words revealed a disturbing truth about how war can corrupt even those sworn to protect others. When the sun rose again over Baghdad, our mission was complete. The network of informers had been dismantled, its leaders captured or eliminated. But the cost had been high, not just in lives lost, but in innocence sacrificed. I looked at my team, men who had become more than subordinates, more than friends. We had faced the worst of the war together and emerged stronger, albeit scarred for life. It was an honor to serve with you, I said simply. Words seemed inadequate to express how we felt, but they were all we had. Baghdad would continue its struggle for peace, but our part in this story had come to an end. We would carry with us the scars, the memories, and the lessons learned in the heat of the conflict, because in the end, war isn't about victory or defeat, it's about the men and women who stand up to do what's right, no matter the cost.